the people of Scotland will vote on whether to separate from the rest of the UK and become an independent country. With all the arguments for and against independence, there is one critical question that remains unanswered, and that is, what currency an independent Scotland might use? It might not seem the most exciting topic, but the question is so important because the notes and coins we have in our hands determine so much about how our country is run, and how independent it actually is. To show why this is, all we need to do is look closely at the notes in the hands of people in the UK. In England and Wales, the £10 note used is this one. In Scotland, they use a £10 note like this one, or this one, or this one. Now, they all look different, but they all have the same value. How is that possible? Let's start with the £10 note in England and Wales.
Here's the thing that gives the note its value. Bank of England. And the statement, I promise to pay the bearer on demand the sum of, in this case, £10. It's what stands behind this statement that is so important. This statement goes back more than 3 centuries to when shops only accepted gold and silver coins, and that was seriously slowing things down. To get around this, the Bank of England, the UK's central bank, wrote out pieces of paper or notes promising to pay the bearer, whoever has the note, the equivalent amount in coins if he or she went to the Bank of England. Nowadays, no one doubts the value of this piece of paper, and that means that today, if you go to the Bank of England with a £10 note, all you get in return is another £10 note. Today, the Bank of England's promise is really just to maintain the value of that note, a promise it has kept pretty well for over 300 years. And how does it keep that promise? 1. The Bank of England will try to control inflation by setting interest rates, which is a posh way of saying that it will try to keep prices from rising too fast. 2. The Bank of England will try to ensure the stability of the financial system, which is a posh word for avoiding more of this. And who gives the Bank of England the power to do all this? Answer: the government of the United Kingdom, England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. It was partly because the UK government wanted to ensure the stability of the financial system that, with the help of the Bank of England, it did this. This is an important point that we will come back to. For now, just remember that behind every one of these is the government of the whole of the United Kingdom. Now let's look at the Scottish £10 notes. There are one of 3 banks with a license to print £10 notes. Each one of these banks promises to pay the bearer on demand. Now, in order to keep that promise, each of these banks has to have money on deposit. And where does it deposit that money? At the Bank of England. Which means this promise is really a promise on top of a promise made by the Bank of England, which, as we have shown, is backed up ultimately by the government of the whole of the UK. So they may look different, they may have different writing, but they are all backed up by the same government of the whole of the United Kingdom, which means they are backed up by the taxpayers of the whole of the United Kingdom, a key point. The question is, what happens if Scotland becomes an independent country? Well, this is where things start to change. Now remember I said there was something important that we would come back to? Well, as a consequence of the bank collapses, 2 of the biggest of which were in Scotland, the UK ended up massively increasing its government debt. That is the final bill everyone in the UK owes. Scotland, as part of the UK, would have to take a fair share of this debt if it becomes an independent country. Now, the exact numbers are not agreed, but the amount will certainly not be small. And while Scotland would have its oil, the money from oil is volatile. The debt payments, meanwhile, would be set in stone, and because an independent Scotland would be a new country, it may face a higher interest rate on its debt than the rate the UK is currently paying. How much debt Scotland ends up with is likely to matter a lot for Scotland's choice of currency option. There are 3 options being seriously discussed at the moment. Option 1. Scotland forms a formal currency union with the rest of the UK. In other words, the Westminster government agrees to allow the Holyrood government to keep using the pound, as it currently does at the moment. This means that all the money in Scotland continues to be backed up by the Bank of England and ultimately the Westminster government, which, if Scotland becomes an independent country, would be a foreign government with foreign taxpayers. So Scotland would have its interest rates set by the Bank of England, which would be owned and controlled by a foreign government. And Scotland's financial stability support would also be in the hands of the Bank of England and Westminster government. And that means that the Westminster government might be called upon to step in to avoid a repeat of. The Westminster government would have to make sure, however, that the Holyrood government could pay it back for any losses which might arise. And remember that this is a Scottish government that has just taken on a hefty amount of debt. So, as part of the deal, the Westminster government is likely to insist on restrictions on what the Scottish government can tax and spend. In the same way that the countries using the euro are supposed to have a sensible level of debt. But hey, let's not get started on that. For some people, the Westminster government having so much control would defeat the whole point of independence. So a second option has been suggested. Scotland keeps using the pound informally. In other words, Scotland doesn't ask the rest of the UK for permission. Under this arrangement, Scotland still has no control over the interest rates. And if this were to happen, then the Bank of England and the Westminster government would not be obliged to step in. The losses from this could be very large for a newly independent country, especially one with high levels of debt. But at least Holyrood would not have the Westminster government tell it how much it can and cannot tax and spend. But this is no picnic, as a country with lots of debt can be constrained by the people it borrows from. Which brings us to the third option. Scotland sets up a new currency all of its own. This new currency would be backed up by a new, fully functioning central bank for Scotland, backed by the Holyrood government, allowing Scotland to set its own interest rates. But it would have to be in charge of its own financial stability, and remember, this is a country that has just taken on a lot of debt. And the Scottish government would have control over what it spends in taxes. But of course, this is subject to how much it can borrow from people. This time, however, there is an added cost that each time Scots travel or trade across the border, they will have to change their currency. But at least, if for some reason things don't go according to plan, the government has other options, such as changing interest rates and allowing the exchange rate to move. So, to recap, on the one hand, Scotland forms a formal currency union with the agreement of the rest of the UK. Crucially, it is not clear how Scotland and the rest of the UK could broker this agreement. Never has such an arrangement between two independent countries been successful over the long term. On the other hand, Scotland forms an informal currency union with the rest of the UK. Note that this is similar to what the Republic of Ireland did for much of the 20th century, before it joined the euro. Not a period of great economic success. Or on the other hand, Scotland forms its own brand new currency. But it is a newly indebted country that has to say, I promise to pay the bearer. And it wouldn't have 300 years of history to build that trust. No option has the upper hand, but these are the main options facing Scotland if it chooses independence. As we have shown, the choice of currency determines so much: control over interest rates, financial stability support, and government spending. Which is the best combination that Scotland can afford is closely linked with how much debt Scotland would end up with at independence. Until we know how much debt Scotland would end up with, it isn't clear which option an independent Scotland should take or even could take. And so, Scotland's choice of currency is the big money question that is still waiting for an answer. This video is produced by NISR with funding from the ESRC. Oh, and by the way, yes, I'm American, and yes, I'm sorry about my accent. But the key thing is, you've got to understand, folks, that this video is from a neutral perspective. If you want to find out more, check out the NISR website, but first, let us know what you think. Here's the